Welcome back to our discussion, the use of data-driven approaches to reach climate resilience, sponsored by LMI here on Federal News Network. My guests today are Kelly Canada. She's a senior consultant for sustainability at LMI, and Dr. Sharon Hayes, the chief technology officer at LMI. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And let's get into the heart of this data analysis that has to happen, this data-driven approach. You need the analytical tools. So give us a sense of the type of technical infrastructure and tools that you need to really approach the climate change analytical question at a federal agency.
We talked a little bit about the challenges related to the sheer volume of the data and the supercomputers that are needed to run those big climate models and all of the data infrastructure that's needed just to manage and handle all of those data sets. But one of the other really big challenges for which we need additional tools are bringing together fundamentally different data sets. So climate models and building codes, integrating human behavior into these models, both in terms of their reactions to and mitigations of climate change. So it really requires bringing together communities that aren't used to working together and may at a fundamental coding level speak completely different languages. It also requires bringing together data experts, the data scientists and so forth, but also the subject matter experts who truly understand the underlying subject matter. So tools do exist. They've been developed in academia, by the World Bank, for example, by the federal government itself, but also certainly in the private sector. And Kelly, I don't know, you may want to speak to some of those tools that the private sector is using right now, because they're among the best that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the recent past, there's been a lot of innovation in the private sector aimed at, again, that improved disclosure and management of climate risks. And there's lots of lessons that I think at the federal, state, and local level government that we can learn here. So one example, there's been a lot of push from financial investors, from shareholders, from insurers that want to make sure, in this instance, that private companies are adequately disclosing and managing the financial risks of climate change to their operations. And so as a result, we're seeing coming out of the private sector recommendations and frameworks and approaches to developing ways to better and more adequately disclose risk and assess the financial impacts of that. At LMI, we've actually got a great partnership with a company called the Climate Service. It's one of the best analytical platforms out there that's essentially taken this immense climate data, been able to merge it with economic modeling that essentially puts a price on the impact of different climate hazards to an organization at the level of its specific assets and aggregated all the way up to the portfolio. With an analytical tool like that, we see a tremendous amount of value to bring that kind of capability to federal agencies to both increase their ability to disclose and understand risks to their stakeholders, which are essentially the American taxpayer, but also understand where to prioritize and make investments in climate adaptation, or in some cases, divestments that can prevent future mission disruptions.
Yeah, that brings up a question too, because we talked about some of the data elements, and it could be a building code, and it could also be a localized climate model or a sea level model for that area. And I remember many years ago, I was on the board of a nonprofit that had a large physical asset, and we brought in a consultant to evaluate how long the roof would last, how long the HVAC would last, and develop some kind of a plan to replace. That was a totally analog exercise and did not take into any account what could happen, like a hurricane in the meantime. So you've got this challenge of combining analog, basically unstructured data, with models that are highly technical pieces of data sets that anyone can use in a computer. So how do you merge something like that to get a realistic picture of what could happen that you can then account for and budget and report for?
Yeah, I mean, in the past, much of that work has been done very manually by changing different types of data. I mean, even lat long versus UTM can completely undermine the tool at work. New techniques, new tools that enable data transformation, cleaning up of the data in a more automated fashion are really, really important here because of the size of so many of the data sets. So that's one key area. And of course, the development of APIs and other ways to link different tools together, different methods, different data sets together are critical. And a number of government agencies have really focused on not just generating the data, but creating pathways to the data so that people can come and get the data, take it, use it in their own environment, merge it with their own data sets, and that will continue to be critical.
Because I would think there's the opportunity to save some labor, because if you have, say, a federal building near a state house that's near a church, that's near a factory, just making that up, but everyone has the same issue in the same location. So maybe some sharing could happen both strategically and also from a technical data sense.
Sure. And that would also naturally lead to resource efficiencies as well, as all these organizations are collaborating together towards the same goal.
Yeah. And so are there specific tools, though? I guess, Sharon, you kind of alluded to this, that can do this now, that can kind of help you answer the questions you may have. And I guess maybe the question then is, how do you ask the right questions? It's a matter of data literacy, but more than that, it's a higher level questions you need to ask in understanding what's going on around you in the world. So how do you begin there to understand the questions that you will then apply data analytics to?
Yeah, so much of it depends on the nature of the exact problem that's trying to be solved, because unfortunately, this is just a wise false station. And so the needs of the intelligence sector, where they might be looking at different places all over the globe and studying human behavior and how humans will react to increasing drought or lack of crops that aren't able to grow in a changing climate. That is completely different than the engineers that are looking at the built environment and whether and how building codes need to change. So it starts, like a lot of problems like this, a lot of technical problems, with really understanding what the customer's problems are, and what they're going to need, the environment that they are working in right now, so that you're not reinventing the wheel or building completely new data environments for them. But it's really that fundamental first step of understanding the problem and bringing the right experts to the problem, because this will not be solved by data scientists alone. You have to have the subject matter experts in the conversation.
And of course, the Biden administration, as we said at the outset, has issued presidential orders and statements on the importance of this, but that's not exactly deep policy development. In your opinion, what type of policy development, what kinds of new frameworks are needed to bring this subject, one, to the top of mind across the federal government, but two, to enable the kinds of investments in data analytics, data literacy, and so on that are needed to really take it on?
Yeah, I think many of the frameworks actually exist. I mean, when you look at the policy frameworks that are needed, I think they're really around three major issues. Continuing to advance the science in this area so that we have a better understanding of where and the extent to which these climate impacts will be felt on a much more local level and not just a global level. And certainly there are interagency working groups that are focused on exactly that, that bring together not just the big ones, the NASA and the NOAA type agencies that are collecting those data, but a number of other agencies that help identify scope and perform the research that's needed. But the other big area is in technology. And obviously the private sector is critical in developing new technologies, but the government can play a really foundational role in helping develop clean energy technologies that will help us produce less carbon, capture what carbon we do release, and adapt to the climate-related challenges that we just can't prevent. So agencies like DOE have a leadership role there. But again, I think the frameworks exist for tackling that within the federal government. It's definitely the policy issues that are the biggest challenge, because those involve Congress, those involve taxpayers, those involve local and state agencies, and so forth.
And Kelly, in the moment we have left, are there any organizations, federal, state, even private, that you can point to that are really good models for this that we could learn from?
Well, certainly LMI. No, just kidding. So there has been some good progress at the state and local government level as well. where we're seeing some successful examples of like private-public partnerships. But that's also actually helping or occurring at the federal level as well. And things like where I've largely been focused over the last decade in sustainability, there are some great programs where it's bringing private sector capital to make infrastructure improvements, really more focused around things like energy efficiency, water efficiency. But why can't we put in climate adaptation measures and strategies like that as well?
All right, why can't we? Now we can. And I want to thank today's guest for giving us a guidance to this. Kelly Canada is a senior consultant for sustainability at LMI. Dr. Sharon Hayes is the chief technology officer at LMI. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. You've been listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search LMI.